ile ilgili konuları kendi aramızda değerlendirdik. Görüş alışverişinde bulunduk. Dün akşam çalışma yemeğinde yine gayri resmi bir şekilde NATO'nun
Similarly, at the evening, we talked about the expansion of NATO and the membership status of NATO. Sweden and Finland, as well as their ministries of foreign affairs, were invited. This morning's first session was about the situation in Ukraine, and the last session concerned, as you know, the June NATO summit in Madrid about the strategic conceptual documentation approval for NATO. And this strategic concept will discuss our views, as it is a draft right now, and our recommendations will be shared soon enough with our other allies in the NATO. In the evening, about the expansion of NATO, Sweden and Finland also had attended to the dinner, as we've said. As Turkey, our stance has been clear in this regard. As Turkey, we accept the NATO policy for expansion. Many NATO countries, especially Georgia and Ukraine, even Bosnia-Herzegovina, was rejected by many. However, we supported the open door policy of NATO many times in foreign affairs meetings. NATO is an alliance. It's an organization. It's not an independent international organization. So, alliance matters, especially in times when we are against one another. We have to show mutual support. So, for these both nations, Mr. President Recep Tayyip Erdogan on Friday clearly expressed our stance in this regard, and of course it echoed to here. With the clear reasoning, we also explained our stance in the meeting. These two nations, especially in regards to PKK and YPG terrorist groups and their members, have close relations. Especially Sweden has given armament aid. And also, in other topics, we clearly expressed ourselves why we're against it. Of course, with pictures and other evident material, we described clearly to our allies in the meeting. Therefore, in NATO, existing members of NATO that also hold conversation or support terrorist organizations and have sanctioning against Turkey in terms of defensive and security goods, we urge them to change their stance, as it stands against the spirit of an alliance. And these two nations' foreign affairs ministers, with Hekka and Anna, the respective ministries of Finland and Sweden, we held detailed talks, which I also had described beforehand. Again, with documentation, we talked about what we're disturbed about, and we also discussed the support, the potential aid they're giving to the members. And we again described everything and reiterated and also expressed clearly what our expectations are. In terms of exports, we also discussed what had happened. Sadly, these two countries in defensive goods have continued their restrictions for Turkey, have sanctions for exportation. For many countries, for these two especially that wish to join NATO, having them restrict an already existing NATO member is unacceptable. In normal conditions, you have sanctions for nations you consider hostile or enemies. So, we expressed our disturbances and expectations alike. They also recommended some actions and opinions for Turkey and what can be done for collaboration. That's why we're expecting more dialogue. Our worries are genuine, and clearly stated, we are not against NATO's expansion, but for the nations that support terrorism and have policies against us, we believe that they should not be part of NATO with this behavior. After the evening talks, in this morning, in another session, many of our colleagues have discussed the membership and shown support for their membership and said they understand worries of Turkey and these should be addressed. And to allies that express this, we wish to thank them. And in this regard, especially NATO member states should also take appropriate action. In the evening, we held these talks. This morning was about Ukraine, and our session dealt with Turkey's exclusive aid for ceasefire by extracting civilians and safely treating wounded soldiers and providing security for naval cargo, especially food cargo. And we briefly informed sides about our work with the UN Secretary General and with World Food Programme. Also have been informed, and we also informed the sides about how we collaborate with these organizations. Of course, Ukraine sees support from NATO, but on the other hand, we should work on having a ceasefire. Extension of the fight has costs. As we talk about costs now, there will be costs in the ongoing conflict. Ukraine has expectations. In exchange for neutrality, they demand security. And for their conditions, we discussed what should be done and what can be done. We had exchanged ideas. Of course, the humanitarian situation worsens in Ukraine. Turkey supports ceasefire and on the other hand wishes to protect civilians, and we also recently had extracted around 600 citizens, and we have taken the role of an initiator for extraction with related organizations involved. Of course, trade, as I iterated, for the naval cargo has been discussed, and for the ceasefire, we also expressed our worries and continued efforts. Again, in the NATO summit, as I've discussed before, many concepts are being discussed and exchanged ideas. Of course, fight against terror, of all kinds terror, was a priority in our dialogue. And also, NATO's understanding of security, the protection of the agreed memorandums, and also NATO-EU relations, and the allies of NATO that are not in EU have a role played. So their mutual benefits and their rights, based around mutual respect, was an important point of iteration. Again, Russia's attack on Ukraine today shows that our understanding of security has changed, but this strategic concept, we've said, is about the documentation that will be discussed and agreed upon and should not be limited to conditions of today, but also cover for the future threats and how flexible NATO should be to take appropriate reactions. And as Turkey, we discussed the future of NATO and the alliance as a whole. Of course, as with every meeting held, in this we also held bilateral talks with many colleagues. We had a trilateral meeting just now, again with the Denmark Minister of Foreign Affairs, and also Croatia was being discussed. We also held a 5-minute conversation with Mr. Blinken of America, But we kept it short because we would be meeting in the near future in New York, so the bilateral conversation would continue. Similarly, German Minister of Foreign Affairs and ministers of many other nations, such as Canada, Marco, my old friend, was also, as well as Hungary and other nations' ministers of foreign affairs were in the conversations. We discussed topics about our respective bilateral ties. It was a beneficial meeting, and our semi-official ministers' meeting will be shortly concluded, and we will go back to our country. I would like to answer your questions if you have them.
Göz önünde bulunduracakları gibi anladım sizin açıklamalarınızda. Ne tür sözler verildi?
Burada herhangi
In here, of course, in regards to terrorism, they also recognize PKK as a terrorist organization. Therefore, their stance on this will continue as described. Of course, in the EU list, PKK is a terrorist organization, but their activities in their countries, Denmark, as such country, had also basis for PKK sympathizers. So later on, PKK channels continue to do broadcasts in their countries. PKK camp trained terrorists transferred through Syria and changed name. We see people in PKK camps with other terrorists with pictures. We see their pictures with Öcalan, their leader, and we've also shown them this. And on the other hand, we see posters of the terrorist leader, and on the other hand, his sidemen. So we describe that there's no difference once they cross the border. So saying PKK is on the list is not enough. So in other topics, we say that if you have worries, we can collaborate. In this regard, we follow the Turkish public, and we describe why we are against these two nations. And we described how the Turkish people has to be accepted into it. We are a republic, we have a president. I'm the Minister of Foreign Affairs, and I represent my nation and my people. So my politics are my people. This is the actuality I have. This is above parties. The terrorist situation is not about People's Alliance in the politics or my party. As a patriot, we all are sensitive in this regard. So this is beyond politics. And therefore, they had an offer to collaborate, and in the future, we will see what moves they will do, what guarantees they will give. And we also had expressed our expectations in many meetings yesterday.
İlişkin endişelerinin giderilebileceği noktasında bir umutlu olduklarını ifade ettiler. Acaba Türkiye açısından bugünkü pencere nedir efendim? Hava nasıldır? Bundan sonraki süreç nasıl işleyebilir efendim?
Şimdi arkadaşlar bizim
Now, friends, our stance is clear cut. This is not a threat. This is not a negotiation. We're not aiming for a profit or anything. This is not populism either. This is clearly about two candidate nations and their respective support for terrorism and our objective findings. We exchange and express these. Sweden's announcements were not constructive. Rather, they were provocative, as they continue to do so, despite our warnings. However, Finland is cautious
çözülebileceğine yönelik
and
inancını da söylüyor.
believes
Bunun bir
that
günde
it can be
olmayacağını da
resolved
söylüyor.
and has said this
Olmayacağını
won't
da söylüyor.
happen
Olmayacağı
overnight.
konusunda da net
And
bir
in
şey
regards to
söylemiyor.
its completion,
Kendisine
there was
dün
no
toplantıda
clear-cut
da
answer.
teşekkür ettim.
I also
Yani
thanked them
tutumumuz
in the
gayet
meeting
açık, net.
yesterday,
Ama
as
Finlandiya
we've
Dışişleri
seen their
Bakanı'nın bu
stance
tutuma
as
karşı da
clear
son
as
derece
ours,
saygılı olduğunu,
and I've also
görüyoruz.
seen
Ama aynı şeyi
respectful
İsveç tarafında,
return from Finland,
görmüyoruz.
sadly
Diğer,
not from Sweden.
müttefiklerin açıklamalarına
As for
baktığımız
other
zaman da
allies'
tabii ki,
announcements,
umut
of
var,
course,
konuşmak
there is
durumundalar.
hope
Ama onlar
on the
da,
horizon.
birçoğunun da hak
However,
verdiği
they
gibi
also
bizim bu
rightfully
konudaki
say
endişelerimizi ve,
that they understand
karşı
our
çıkmamızın,
worries
şu anda rezerv
and they
koymamızın,
understand
gereklerini
our
gayet iyi
perseverance
biliyorlar.
in the
Fotoğrafları ve
candidation.
belgeleri toplantıda da
And the
gösterdim.
meeting,
Daha sonra
we've
ikili
shown the
görüşmelerde de,
evidence, and on the
gösterdim.
bilateral
Dolayısıyla,
meetings we developed
burada
on it.
Finlandiya Dışişleri Bakanı'nın
Finland
yaklaşımı gerçekçi bir
Foreign
yaklaşım.
Affairs Minister was a realist.
Bu
His
görüşmeler
approach
oldu diye
was
endişelerimizi
realistic.
getirdik diye biz hemen
We
fikri
expressed our
fikrimizden vazgeçtik
worries,
ya da bunu bir kere
and
gündeme
they
getirelim,
haven't
laf
said,
olsun diye
oh, we're
getirelim
just
diye bir şey yok.
canceling this all
Bu çok
out
ciddi
or
bir,
anything.
konudur.
This is a serious
Dolayısıyla,
topic.
bizim bu
Therefore,
konudaki tutumumuz da
our
gayet,
stance in this
açık, net.
has been clearly described.
Bu Finlandiya Dışişleri Bakanı Aavistos'un açıklamalarından bahsettiniz. Bir Alman medyasında da yer aldı bugün. Biz bu sorunun çözüleceğinden eminiz ama ne zaman olacağı ya da hızlı olacağı konusunda size söz veremem açıklamasında bulundu. Tabii ki bunu nasıl yorumluyor Türkiye? Siz nasıl yorumluyorsunuz? Yani üyelikten önce herhangi bir şekilde Türkiye net, somut adımlar bekliyor mu Finlandiya'dan? Yoksa önce üyelik olacak, ondan sonra bunun zamanı mı?
Biz kesinlikle yani bir günde bu noktaya
Honestly, wish to say this didn't happen overnight.
Biz
Friends,
bu konuda
yesterday we held a meeting in this topic, and in Stockholm, in Sweden, its capital, this terrorist organization held meetings.
Bundan daha kısa bir süre önce,
Even
İsveç'in
shorter time frame,
sürecinin başlamasından hemen
Sweden's
sonra
candidate procedures had begun, and this terrorist organization's so-called armed forces, their so-called
ya da başındaki kişi
armed forces and their leader
kabul ettiler. Hem de İsveç
accepted
Savunma
it.
Bakanı kabul etti.
The Sweden Minister of Defense
Hem Dışişleri Bakanı
accepted
kabul
them.
etti, hem
Foreign
Savunma
Affairs
Bakanı
and
kabul etti.
Defense ministries welcomed them.
Sonuçta
As a result,
yani bu konuda
this
biz
this topic is not something that happened haphazardly.
Şimdi bu
Our stance didn't develop overnight. These countries did these events, and Turkey had worries. In words or actions, you cannot just say, oh, we'll handle it.
Ve üye olduktan sonra da
And after membership,
üye oldular.
let's say they are members, full-time members. What if they go back on their old policies?
Bir garanti var mı?
There's no
Yok.
guarantees.
Bir kere halkımız bizim
Our people,
halkımız güvenmiyor.
our people do
Bu
not trust this
yaptıklarından dolayı. Özellikle
due to
İsveç için
all
söylüyorum.
things that happened, especially
Yani
for
sonuç
Sweden.
itibariyle,
Therefore,
bu hani geldik burada gündeme
we
getirdik.
talked
Ondan
about
sonra da
this, we brought this
ertesi
topic
gün,
up, and the
biz,
day after,
hata etmişiz gibi
oh,
bir
we
durum
made
yok.
a mistake,
Burada
is not something we would iterate.
güvenlik garantilerinin olması.
We want
Ve bu
guaranteed
sadece- bu
security
sadece
actions
bu iki
taken.
aday ilk üye için de geçerli.
This is not
Müttefikler için de
just
geçerli
for
ve
two candidates.
terör
This
örgütlerine
was a
desteği
call out
kesinlikle
for all
sonlandırılmaları
nations,
gerekiyor.
and their
Türkiye
aid
gibi
for
bir
terrorism
müttefike yönelik,
should cease. Turkey, in this
savunma sanayi ürünleri
alliance,
kısıtlaması ya da ihracat
the
izinleri,
sanctions
yasakların
or
da kesinlikle
exportation
kalkması
bans
lazım.
for defensive
Yani
goods
bunu
should
bu süreçte
cease
pazarlık unsuru
immediately.
olarak söylemiyorum.
This is
Müttefiklik-
not a bargain.
müttefikliğin gereği olarak
This is
söylüyorum.
on par
Ama bu
with
iki ülkeyle
alliance and
ilgili,
its necessities. These two countries,
güvensizlik ve
in
endişe
especially,
ortada. Özellikle
there
de
is
İsveç'le
worry,
ilgili.
there is questions for Sweden.
Sağ olun arkadaşlar.